Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into this election cycle with us? We're going to go way past those headlines and unpack what's really going on, especially for all of you here in Texas. Things are getting interesting.
Absolutely.
So we've been looking at Newsweek, and they've got some intriguing poll numbers. Seems like Kamala Harris is pulling ahead nationally, even significantly, according to them.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you'd agree you can't just stop at those top-line numbers, right?
Oh, absolutely not. It's fascinating, actually, the difference when you zoom out from the national picture and look at individual states. Swing states, to be precise. That's where the real action is.
Swing states, for those of us who haven't encountered the term before.
Right. So those are the states where the vote tends to be really close between the Democrats and Republicans year after year. That makes them super important come election time.
Each one is like its own little battleground that could tip the scales.
Exactly. So Newsweek highlights this YouGov poll, puts Harris up by 4 points nationally. Sounds comfy, right? But then you look at the swing states, places like Arizona, Georgia, even North Carolina, and suddenly it's neck and neck.
So those national polls can be deceiving.
They can be. I mean, think back to 2016. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote clear as day, but lost the election because of the Electoral College. And we're not talking about some outdated system here. It's a fundamental part of how we choose a president.
Right. Each state gets a certain number of electoral votes depending on its population, and you need a majority of those to win, not just the most individual votes overall.
Exactly. And Newsweek actually quotes this expert, Andrew Rowe. He's big in American politics. He points out that in a lot of these swing states, Harris is only slightly ahead or even trailing behind.
Wow. Okay, so we need to keep our eyes on those swing states then. So where does Texas fall in all of this? It's a big state, lots of electoral votes.
It does. And Texas, you're right. Historically, it's been pretty reliably Republican.
Right.
But we have seen some shifts recently, the state's becoming more and more diverse. It's actually really interesting. And there's a reason both campaigns are pouring resources into Texas right now.
It's anyone's game.
Yeah, it's a battleground state now, no doubt.
Which makes your vote here even more important. And speaking of which, we want to make sure all of you listening in Texas have everything you need to participate in this election. Early voting in Texas starts on October 21st, and the deadline to register to vote is October 7th.
Get on it.
Make sure you don't miss those dates. But let's talk about what's actually at stake this election, because it goes way beyond the surface level.
Absolutely.
We're talking about policies that will have a direct impact on your lives right here in Texas.
It's really interesting this time around, especially, seeing how these national issues are playing out locally. Take the abortion rights debate, for example. It's been huge all over the country. But Texas is right at the center of it all.
And to really grasp what's at stake, you have to go beyond the laws and the political rhetoric and look at the real human impact. One story that really got to me was Hadley Duvall's. She's a woman from Kentucky, and she shared her experience, and it's just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's a tough one to hear for sure. And the Harris campaign, actually, they're featuring her story in one of their new ads.
Oh.
It really drives home the potential consequences if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned. Hadley, you see, she was raped by her stepfather at 12 years old, became pregnant.
Oh, my gosh.
And thankfully, she had options at that time. But her story, it makes you think, what happens to all those women, all those families, if Roe v. Wade disappears?
It really brings it home, doesn't it, that these decisions about health care, about reproductive rights, they're not just some abstract debate happening in Washington.
Yeah.
These are choices that have real consequences for people, for families right here in our communities.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, right? The way Hadley's story is being used in this election, it really personalizes the issue, brings it front and center.
It's a good reminder that elections, they're about more than just numbers on a screen or polls. They're about our values, about our lives, the lives of our neighbors. Speaking of bringing issues to the forefront, did you see Billie Eilish came out endorsing Kamala Harris?
I did. That's a smart move by the Harris campaign. You got to reach those younger voters.
Absolutely.
Billie Eilish, she's huge with Gen Z. And that's a demographic that could be a deciding factor, especially in those tight swing state races we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, brilliant move to get her on board.
It really shows you the power of pop culture in politics these days.
Absolutely. It's not just your traditional rallies and speeches anymore. You got to meet voters where they are. And for a lot of young people, that's music, social media, the celebrities they follow. It's a whole different ballgame.
It's like this whole other dimension to the election, you know? You've got musicians, actors, even online influencers using their platforms to talk about politics.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, it can be great for engagement, right? Gets people talking, maybe even motivates some folks to vote who wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there's always that risk of oversimplifying things or even spreading misinformation. Voters really have to be careful, think critically,
Yeah.
Go beyond just the endorsement itself. Do your research on the candidates, what they actually stand for.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, the social media buzz. But at the end of the day, we've all got a responsibility to be informed voters. Look beyond those flashy headlines, those celebrity endorsements, really dig into the issues.
Exactly. Are you engaging with the issues or just following the crowd? It's about thinking for yourself, understanding the nuances, forming your own conclusions based on facts, and on a deeper understanding of what's really at stake here.
It's like we've been saying this whole time. Gotta look beyond the surface, right? There's always more to it, especially with this election.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much to unpack. Where do we even begin? We've got those nail-biter races in the swing states, the power of the vote here in Texas, even how these personal stories, pop culture, it all ties in.
It's a lot.
It is. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for everyone listening?
Well, if nothing else, remember, this election is far from over. Those national polls, they might show Harris with a comfy lead.
Right, we saw that.
But the Electoral College, those razor-thin margins in the swing states, every single vote counts.
Especially in Texas, right? Like we were saying.
Especially in Texas.
Yeah.
The way the state's changing, all those electoral votes up for grabs, it's a whole different ballgame now. More unpredictable than ever.
It's wild how the national stuff, it all echoes here in Texas, even gets amplified.
It really does. And you see that connection national to local with that Hadley Duvall story, too.
Oh, absolutely.
What happened to her in Kentucky, it's got huge implications for the abortion debate right here in Texas. Reminds us these aren't just talking points, Real people are affected.
Real lives on the line. It's a powerful message. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with? Something to chew on.
I'd say this. Don't just watch this election happen. Be a part of it. Read past those headlines. Let those personal stories really sink in.
Yeah.
And most importantly, make your voice heard. Your vote is your voice, plain and simple. It can shape the future of Texas, the whole country, really.
Couldn't agree more. And don't forget, everyone, we'll have links to all the articles we talked about, plus info on voter registration, early voting locations, even how to get involved with local campaigns. Because that's what it's all about, right? It's not just who sits in the Oval Office. It's about building the future we want to see for ourselves, our communities, for everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.